All right, we will go ahead and get started. I'm really appreciative of everybody being here today. I'm very excited about this webinar. Everyone keeps making fun of me for how excited I am to talk about insurance, but I think that everybody's going to walk away really informed. Alongside my co-host, the lovely Jen Jenkins, we have Ross Taylor, who is an insurance broker that specializes in the entertainment industry. He has worked with creatives, from photographers to feature film directors and everyone in between, helping them to secure their insurance solutions. He is a third generation at Taylor and Taylor. His grandfather actually founded the company. He's got a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology. He's an avid runner and has completed multiple marathons, including the New York City Marathon, which is exceptionally impressive to me. Thank you so much, Ross, for being here today and helping us navigate the world of insurance.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So we wanted to start today just by kind of understanding our audience before we start drilling down into the nitty-gritty with Ross. And we also wanted to say, please, by all means, raise your hands and ask questions. We want this to be a conversation. So if we get on a topic and you'd like us to dive a little bit further, like let's do that. We can always do a part 2 if we don't make it through our list of conversation topics today. So please don't be shy. So in order to just kind of understand who we have in the audience and what's important, we're going to launch a little bit of a member poll just to find out what kind of insurance do you have for your business. Are you currently carrying general liability only? Do you also have workers' compensation on top of that? Or do you also have, in addition to your general liabilities and workers' compensation, a production package? And then the last option being you've got the works. You've got general liability, workers' compensation, an umbrella. If you don't know what an umbrella is, no worries. We're going to explain that today. And a production package on top of that. So we'll give this poll about 5 more seconds. So please get your answers in, and then we'll see where we're at. Okay. Awesome. So it seems as though a lot of us have general liability. Well, it's kind of a mix. It's a mixed bag. Okay, great. That's fantastic. Well, hopefully we'll drill down a little bit more into limits and helping you to understand if you are appropriately insured. So Ross, I'm going to turn it over to you. But first question is, like, can you just explain to us what liability insurance is? Why do we all have it?
Yes. Well, thank you again for having me. Appreciate it. So if you have a business, the 2 most important coverages to have are general liability and workers' compensation. We'll start with workers' compensation. Workers' compensation is injury to employees. So if you are employing anyone, it could be an independent contractor, it could be any other 1099, part-time, full-time, you need to have workers' compensation for these individuals. Again, it's mandated by the states and it covers injuries to employees. If you're in New York or California or a couple other states, you have to have disability for these employees as well. General liability is your typical trip and fall coverage. So if it protects your company for bodily injury and property damage claims against your company, most locations, other vendors, clients, brands all require you have at least general liability and workers' compensation.
So,
yes.
Well, I was just going to ask, if you are a sole proprietor, and you're the only employee of your business, do you have to have workers' compensation?
So if you're a sole proprietor or the owner of your own LLC or corporation, you do not need to have workers' compensation coverage. In New York and California, if you're a sole proprietor, you have to file for an exemption. It's not that easy to get. If you have your own LLC or corp, you don't need to file for that exemption. You, as the owner of that LLC or corp, doesn't you don't need to have workers' compensation for yourself, but you do need to have it for your employees.
Okay, got it. So I think this may not come up as much with artist representatives or even producers that are part of a production company, but it started to come up more and more with my artists that will have an LLC or just be a sole prop and not have workers' compensation. And we're hearing that they need to run through payroll, especially on live action jobs. Can you explain that to us at all, and why that's the case?
So if it's just a LLC or corp and it's a single stylist or a single photographer and they're not bringing anyone else to set, there's been a lot of pushback, but I have seen a lot of these stylists and photographers successfully plead their case saying, I'm the only owner of my own LLC or corp. I don't need workers' comp and I don't need to go through payroll. The problem becomes if they bring anyone else to set, that's their employee. That's their responsibility. They need to have workers' compensation coverage and show proof to the main producer of the job. Hey, I'm here. This is my assistant, my employee. I have workers' compensation for them. But that's the pushback.
That's interesting. Now, what if the assistants that they bring to the job are running through the production company's payroll? Does that limit their liability then?
So that is the easiest way around not making sure that each LLC or corp has workers' compensation is you run all those assistants and all those independent contractors through payroll. That limits the producer's liability, yes. And someone's providing coverage for them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's definitely interesting. So how do you pick your limits? How do you decide with your liability insurance how much you need?
So workers' compensation, as long as you have a workers' compensation policy in place, it will cover any and all employees, and it will pay any and all medical expenses for those employees and assistants. So once it's a catch-all. General liability, on the other hand, usually only provides $1 million of coverage for bodily injury and property damage that your business causes. More and more clients, more and more locations, especially here in New York and in LA, requiring $2, $3, $4, $5 million of coverage. The general liability policy only provides 1 million typically, so you need an umbrella policy that goes over that. So that just adds to general liability. So if you have a $1 million general liability policy and a $1 million umbrella, that gives you $2 million of coverage. If you have a $1 million general liability policy and a $4 million umbrella, that gives you the $5 million of coverage that most locations and now clients and brands are requiring.
So is there a difference? You're talking about general liability, but I've also heard about professional liability. How do those two things differ?
So yes, so typically a company has general liability and non-owned and hired auto liability for rented vehicles. Those are the most common liability policies that companies have because of all the copyright, trademark infringement lawsuits or data breaches and stuff like that. Clients, brands are requiring professional liability and cyber liability. Professional liability typically covers your errors in your work, which for a production company is usually copyright and trademark infringement coverage. If you're a representation company, it's booking the wrong person for a job or some failure of that contract in providing the work and your scope to your client. And then cyber liability is data breaches of client information, or just sometimes it could be just your employees' information. If you have social security numbers, driver's licenses, and you get hacked, you have to notify all those people that they've been hacked and give them what's called monitoring services for like 12, 14 months. So that's why clients, brands are requiring now professional and cyber liability.
Okay. I know we're going to talk about cyber liability more, so we'll continue to dig into that, especially as people are continuing to join us. Before we move off this topic, there's a couple questions in the chat. Just kind of going back to what we originally started talking about. If the photographer hires the assistant plus the tech, well, I think we answered this, but let's just, because I know a few people joined us, but the producer is running them through payroll. Does the photographer still need workers' comp? That's our
so anyone that is run through payroll on the production company has to provide the workers' compensation for. Okay. That is always a case. Again, if you are the producer and you're like, no, like that's your employee, that's your assistant, I want you to provide coverage, then you need to get that proof of workers' compensation from that photographer or that stylist or whoever is bringing those people to set.
That's been something that has come up for us in terms of just being prepared should we ever have an audit, that we now ask for proof of workers' comp. Am I being paranoid, or is that something that you would recommend that producers do?
So I would always recommend that a producer keeps track of who they're putting through payroll, because yes, at the end of the day, they are responsible for that premium and they don't want to get stuck with the bill. So you either get proof that someone has workers' compensation coverage, then you are not covering them. You tell the auditor, hey, this is the certificate of workers' compensation. This was not on my payroll. Or you fully know that, oh, I'm hiring these people onto my payroll, but at the end of the day, I have to pay the premium. So do I pass that cost off to the client? Do I pass that cost off to the photographer? That becomes just a business decision you have to make.
Got it. Another really good question that I hadn't really thought about before, but you insure me in New York. What happens when I'm shooting in another state? Does my insurance travel? Please say yes.
So general liability, auto liability is covered anywhere in the United States and Canada. Workers' compensation covers anywhere in the US except for 4 states. If you hire people in Ohio, Wyoming, North Dakota, and Washington, state of Washington, not Washington, D.C., you have to either put them through a payroll service that has workers' compensation for those 4 states, or hire a local production service company in those 4 states. Again, they're state of Washington, Wyoming, North Dakota, and Ohio. It's not if you're bringing people to those states, it's only if you're hiring people in those states, you need that extra coverage.
And why is that?
Those states don't allow private insurance carriers to offer workers' compensation. So the main 5 insurance carriers, I guess, in the entertainment industry, like Allianz, Chubb, One Beacon Intact, Hiscox, those states, for whatever reason, don't allow those insurance carriers to provide coverage in those 4 states. So they make you buy it through the state fund. It's kind of like New York State disability or California disability. That's through the Department of Labor instead of a private insurance carrier.
Mm.
That's so interesting. Thanks, Russ. Also, my question is, this term production package is used all the time, but what does a standard production package contain?
Great question. Thank you. So if you are producing any jobs, meaning you are signing the location agreements, you are signing the equipment contracts, rented cars, you should be carrying a production package policy. This covers the equipment, damage to rented vehicles, prop sets and wardrobe, and usually covers reshoot coverage for if a location is damaged or something happens on set where equipment breaks and you have a delay or need to reshoot.
Got it. And so Giant works with third-party producers, but does Giant need to carry some form of a production package if we're not signing agreements with locations or talent?
So there's two ways to properly insure productions. One, you have the contract, you are signing all the location agreements and the equipment contracts and everything. You need to have this production package. Or two, if you have a third-party producer, that producer has to then carry that production package. That producer has to sign the location agreements, the equipment contracts, and name your company as an additional insured under their policies. That way, you know that they have the proper coverage, and for whatever reason, if there's a liability claim, you are then covered under their policies.
Okay, that makes sense. What about reshoot insurance? That comes up for us quite a bit too. So if we needed to do a reshoot, was the photographer's fault or the production's fault, let's say, is that covered under a production package?
So reshoot claims are handled usually on a case-by-case basis. Production packages vary drastically. Most production package policies will cover reshoots for damage to locations, like a fire to a location, you can't shoot, or damage to equipment, like the photographer drops the camera, can't shoot. If we start getting into different scenarios, for instance, weather, that is not typically covered. Non-appearance due to COVID or sickness is not typically covered. These situations, like weather and this COVID exposure, you can buy additional coverage for these reshoots, but they cost a lot of money and they're not typically covered in a standard production package. The standard production package, again, covers typically damage to a location, damage to property on set that causes a reshoot.
Got it. How is your premium calculated?
So I always tell all my clients, if you were carrying workers' compensation, general liability, auto liability in this production package, your premium is going to be anywhere from 2 to 2.5% of your production costs. If you are charging your client 2.5 to 3%, you are covering all of those insurance costs and sometimes making a profit on that line item.
Got it. Okay. How is hired automobile coverage of a production policy different from regular auto insurance?
So it's a great question. A production package covers damage to rented vehicles. A typical auto policy covers owned autos that a person owns, a company owns. You can add a rented vehicle physical damage to a standard auto policy, but it's much more expensive. It usually provides low limits of insurance for a vehicle, typically up to like 50,000, maybe 100,000. If you're renting big production vehicles or picture cars, you have much higher limits of insurance under a standard production package.
Got it. Okay. I'm going to throw this into, we hadn't discussed earlier, but I'm seeing wrap-up insurance quite often now as well, where the ad agency or client will actually insure the production. And at the AMA, we've talked a lot about needing to be added as named insured, which is different from additional insured. Is that correct?
Yes. So first of all, let's explain wrap-up insurance. Wrap-up insurance is where an agency or a client is providing all of the production coverage for the job. You as a producer or a rep, your insurance really is not covering the job except for workers' compensation. You are still responsible for workers' compensation, and you should be charging that back to the brand or the client or the agency who's giving you this wrap-up insurance. Second part, yes, additional insured and named insured are very different. A named insured is basically you become a part owner of that client agency policy. So it would work, that insurance works as if the same as if you use your own insurance for that job. So you damage something, the policy is going to cover it. You hurt someone, the policy is going to cover it. An additional insured is you are only covered for the negligent acts or operations of the named insured. So if you were only additional insured on that policy, the agency or the client would have to cause the property damage or bodily injury for you to be covered. It does not provide any coverage if you did that because you're an additional insured, not a named insured.
Can you give us an example? I mean, I don't want to put fear in anybody's heart, but that's, I as you say that to me, I hear and understand the nuance, but I think an example would be really great.
Yeah, so the example I always use is, so you were covering a job using your own production insurance. You cause a fire to the location, right? Every location contract that I've ever seen makes you name the landlord or the owner of that location as an additional insured. Why? Because if someone got hurt in that fire, they're not only going to sue you as the producer that caused the damage, the fire, they're also going to sue the landlord because they own the building, or whoever the building manager is. They are an additional insured under your policy. You caused it, but they are still covered because they are covered for the negligent acts, operations of you. If for some reason you didn't cause anything, right? Just say there was a boiler and it blew up and caused a fire to the location. Well, you didn't cause any of that damage, so you wouldn't be involved in that claim. They would go after directly that landlord or person responsible for that. That's why they have insurance for that location, because your policy doesn't cover everything. It only covers the actions of you. So on a wrap-up job, if you were not named as a named insured, if you caused something on the set, you would have no coverage. You would have to rely on your own insurance, not the wrap-up. And the purpose of the wrap-up insurance is to transfer that risk from you to that other policy. So that other policy becomes a primary policy instead of using your own insurance.
Got it. Okay. If anyone else has any questions about this, please chime in as well. There's a lot to unpack here today.
I actually do have a question. So a lot of times I will be working on a project and the client says that they're going to provide the insurance, which I know they will do eventually. But sometimes the insurance package will actually come to us like 2 days after the shoot. Does anyone else have this happen?
Happens all the time.
Okay. So in that instance, like we've already had to book locations and I've given them my insurance because I don't have really any other option. In the event that something goes wrong, would I just then like say, don't file it on their insurance, file it on this other insurance that I'm giving you? Or have I already put myself at risk where they're going to claim on my insurance?
So the location contract or permit, whatever, is going to be under usually the production company's name, no matter what, even if there is wrap-up insurance involved. What I typically tell people that are in this crunch is, yes, sometimes we provide the insurance certificates because you just don't want to lose that location or that permit.
Right.
But then once you get the wrap-up certificates, you contact those people right away and you swap out the certificates and you say, my insurance is not covering this. Please file this other insurance certificate for this permit or for this location. And once you get confirmation back, usually it's fine because you are a named insured on that other policy.
So we're getting a question in the chat about this named insured and just asking for us to explain it a little bit further. I think one of also, Ross, if you could explain, because when I've talked to my clients about, okay, I'll use your wrap-up insurance, but I need to be a named insured. Sometimes I have to explain further to them too what that means, because they just pull a cert for me as an additional insured.
Okay, yes.
And can you explain like how you can even recognize that you've been a named insured versus an additional insured?
Yep. So for someone that does not know a lot about insurance, the first step, if you're involved in wrap-up insurance, is to get those certificates of insurance. A certificate of insurance has the named insured in the top left-hand corner, has the limits of insurance below, and then usually has a certificate holder box in the bottom left. That is usually for the additional insured. So if your company name is in the top left, you're good. If your name is on the bottom left, no, you go back and say, no, I want my name, my company name to be in that top left-hand corner of that certificate of insurance. That's the best way for someone who doesn't know a lot about insurance to understand that they've been added as a named insured.
Top left, not the bottom.
Correct.
Got it. And then can you just explain it one more time for us? Because it is complicated.
Yes. So a named insured is you are the owner of the policy. It's just like if you went out and bought insurance for your own company. It's the same exact coverage. It's providing primary coverage for your actions and your liability. The wrap-up insurance it was started in the construction industry a long time ago. It's a way for agencies and clients to provide primary coverage for themselves and for you. Primary coverage for them and for you. Your insurance is no longer primary when they give you wrap-up insurance. Your insurance is not covering that job.
And is it just for that job? Is there a specific time period for that?
The wrap-up insurance certificates specifically say for that job only. So you need to, if you have multiple jobs with a client, you ask for named insured status on every single job that they are requiring the wrap-up insurance.
Got it. And should the artist rep, the artist, and any third-party producer each be named insured?
So typically, just like if you were insuring a job, so if you're the producer and you were using your own insurance, you don't name other companies as named insured. Anyone that you hire should name you as an additional insured. So if you are hiring a stylist, if you are hiring a photographer, if you are hiring anyone that, so again, the difference is a named insured covers the actions of your company for your negligence. People that you bring to set should be responsible for their own actions and their own negligence because they are their own company. If you are hiring them as individuals and not LLCs or corps, they become employees of your company, so they are automatically covered as named insureds under your policy. So I'm going to explain that one more time. If you're hiring people as employees, independent contractors, not as LLCs or corps, they become employees of your company and they are covered under your policy as named insureds because the policy covers you and your employees for actions. If you're hiring someone as an LLC or a corp, you are not responsible for their actions or their negligence. You have to get a certificate from them and have them name your company as an additional insured. So again, on wrap-up insurance, it's the agency and producer. On normal production insurance, it's just the producer as a named insured.
So I'd like to illustrate this with an example. I represent set designers. If Jen comes to my company to hire one of my set designers. And Jen, for the sake of keeping this easy, I'm going to say that you're the producer.
Thank you.
Jen's producing the job.
It never would happen, but yeah.
Would my set designer, who has their own company and their own insurance, would Jen then request that my set designer add her as an additional insured to their policy?
So if the set designer is being paid as an LLC or corp, it is best practices for Jen as the producer to get proof of workers' compensation and general liability and have her company named as an additional insured. Yes.
So now let's add a layer of complexity. That set designer bills through apostrophe, my company. Would Jen ask apostrophe to name her as an additional insured? And I ask my set designer to name me as an additional insured?
So with all vendors, subcontractors, there should be production agreements, and the insurance follows the production agreements. It doesn't matter who pays who, it follows the production agreements. If Jen as a producer is hiring the set designer for those services, there should be a deal memo or some sort of contract says, these are the services you're providing, this is how much you're getting paid. Doesn't matter if she pays the set designer directly or not, the insurance follows that legal liability and that service agreement, that contract.
So if my contract is with apostrophe names me as additional insured.
If the contract says that apostrophe is providing a set designer and that set designer has to provide the insurance, that's the best practices. You really want to be really clear in these service agreements and contracts where the legal liability falls and who is responsible for what. Should all be outlined in the contract. So typically apostrophe would be, I guess, just a rep in that case. So in the agreement says apostrophe is just acting as the rep. Set designer is responsible for the actual services on set, and they will name you as an additional insured under their policies.
Got it. Okay. And we are recording this, by the way, for those of you who need to go back and listen to this again, like myself.
Legal liability is a hard concept to grab.
You
and
just broke my brain then.
That's what this all comes down to, is what you are legally responsible for. That's how insurance responds, legal liability. So you can't insure something you don't have a contract for. It's impossible.
So this is a good question. What if my set designer doesn't have insurance and Jen pays them through payroll?
So in that case, that set designer would become an employee or an independent contractor of Jen's and would be covered for all negligence workers' comp under her policies.
Okay, so this is maybe a good point for our next question, because there is a sort of a trickle down that happens when you're talking about insurance. So I can speak from my own experience. At Giant Artists, we want to focus on artist management. We have not gotten into the production business. So we hire third-party producers to produce our jobs. However, as the client or ad agency's main and initial point of contact, Giant is often signing agreements on behalf of both our artists, the artist services, and the producer or production services. So at Giant, we use third-party producer agreements so that there is a clear understanding of the services our producers are providing, and that is in writing between us and the producers. As far as the client or ad agency are concerned, sometimes I have a lot of luck redlining those agreements and adding in my third-party producer's name and making it very clear who is providing what. Sometimes though, the ad agencies and clients say, I don't care who your third party producer is, you are our vendor, you are liable, in which case I make sure that I really have that third party producer agreement locked. I'm curious, I think we have a member poll about that now. I will add the AMA has a third party producer agreement as a resource for our members. We're curious, do you use a third party representative or producer agreement? And producers, yes, it can go the other way too. For you who are production companies, sometimes you are signing on behalf of artist services. And of course, you don't necessarily represent the artist.
My grammar was bad in this poll question. I'm horrified. I'll take responsibility for that.
Great. So never thought to, downloading the template from the AMA now. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it myself until my attorney pointed it out to me several years ago that I was signing contracts on behalf of my producers. Most of my producers I work with regularly, and we have a fantastic relationship and a great understanding of what they do and what we do. But quite often, you know, we're using a new producer and I don't know how well insured they are, or I don't know if they fully understand what they are meant to provide. And again, producers, I think it can go the opposite direction as well. So yes, I would encourage you guys to look at that resource on the AMA website and ask us any questions about that in particular.
We put it in the chat as well, so that members can go and grab it. You do need to be a member of the AMA, but this is just another example of the shared legal resources that we have on our site, many templates that you can use to as a jumping off point for your company in terms of terms and conditions and what have you. There's a couple questions in the chat too on this point. One of them being, as an agency, I have general liability insurance for my business. Should I have my artists who carry their own general liability insurance name my company as an additional insured?
So it depends on if that agency is signing any contracts for production services or anything to clients. So it's one thing to just, if the artist is just hiring the agency or representation agency just for booking, bookkeeping, HR stuff, that type of stuff, typically no. But if a job comes in to the agency and then they are providing this artist as a resource for this production service that they have now this contract for, yes, you get the artist to name your company as an additional insured. Again, I know this is a hard concept to grasp. It's whatever you are legally responsible for, and you really don't want to be responsible for that, you just pass that off to someone else. You make sure someone else has the coverage for it. That's the basic way I can explain it is, oh, I'm signing this agreement. Well, I'm not providing the insurance for this, but I'm hiring this person who is. Okay, if I'm hiring this person, they need to name me as an additional insured. That way I know I'm covered for my legal liability that I signed for this contract. If there's no contract to really start that, again, and you're just providing bookkeeping, project services for it, then no, you don't need to be named as an additional insured. That only comes into play if you're legally responsible to a client or brand, and then you are providing that service by saying, hey, I have this stylist, this photographer, this director, this producer that's going to be responsible for this, then you get named as an additional insured.
Okay. So it's really about understanding those contracts completely. And I'm going to plug another AMA resource. We have a agreements glossary that really breaks down in simple language various terms that you see on MSAs and scope of works and your standard contracts with ad agencies, so that people can really understand the nuances of what they're signing, because oftentimes I don't think people understand the liability that they're taking on when they sign these contracts. The other thing I will say, since becoming involved with the AMA and getting to know so many other reps in the industry, something that I have learned is that I actually get a say. I can push back on these contracts if they feel unfair, and potentially negotiate a higher advance or make the case for a markup on my job to help me feel comfortable taking it on. I didn't always feel like I could, and that's part of what is so wonderful about this community as well.
Kelly, I have a question.
Please.
So if we represent somebody, and obviously, you know, artists that are working at a high level, you could be working on multiple jobs a week. Can they name us as additionally insured just overall, like as a blanket, or does it have to be on each job?
So typically insurance runs for 1 year and it's not job specific. Most production companies, artists have annual insurance, so you only need to be named once a year if you're providing services for them.
Oh, that's okay. Well, that makes it easier for sure.
Yeah.
So we should essentially go to all of the artists that we represent and ask them to name our agencies as additionally insured.
If you are signing contracts with brands and advertisers for jobs and then providing these artists for those jobs, then yes. If you're simply just providing bookkeeping services, job services, then typically no. I always say it's best practice to make sure that all your artists have at least workers' compensation coverage, because that could come back on your audit.
We won't represent people unless they have workers' comp.
Perfect.
So
Great business
I was
practice.
audited a long time ago and put that into place. So.
Great business practice. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Ellie, I would add to our other resource, which is our terms and conditions. We have terms and conditions for companies like Kelly's that have representation and production under one roof. And we have other terms and conditions for companies like mine who hire outside production. So JC, you might want to add a link to that as well.
So all of this conversation has me really worried that I have enough insurance. Can you talk to us about an umbrella policy and
So,
the extra coverage that provides?
sure.
I have one more question that kind
yes.
of fits into that. Sorry.
Okay.
So like, what about if you represent hair, makeup, and manicurists? Because those people that we represent, they have workers' comp, but they don't have a blanket insurance policy. Do those people need to have
So
some kind of extra insurance
So
to cover
usually,
all of us?
so usually those types of, so actually this is, I think the number one kind of change that I've seen in the past couple of years is these makeup artists, stylists, where before they weren't asked to provide general liability or even coverage for their kits, and they were just getting put on production's payroll. That's fine if they're getting put on production's payroll. Then you don't need to worry about that. It's if they're billing as corps, LLCs, then they need to be like every other director, photographer, and provide the general liability and the workers' compensation coverage for themselves.
Wow, okay. They're gonna love that.
Taking notes.
Yep. I mean, yeah, back in the day, we did business with a bunch of companies, and this was the number one pushback, is these artists, these makeup artists and stylists are like, no, like, we don't need to provide this coverage. And the way around it was production companies just payrolling these people for forever. But now that they want to be act like everyone else, like a photographer, a director, well, then you have to have your own coverage just like them.
Thank you.
So talk to me about the umbrella policy and how do you
Sure.
know that you need an umbrella policy?
So yes, so an umbrella just adds liability coverage to your general auto and employer's liability. If you have those three policies, employer's liability is part of workers' compensation. So if you have a workers' compensation policy, you have a general liability policy, and you have an auto liability policy, you have $1 million of liability coverage. If you want more than that, or a location requires you to have more than that, or a client requires you to have more than that, the way to increase your liability limit above $1 million is adding an umbrella. You can add a $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 million umbrella that gives you, let's say you have a $1 million general liability policy and a $1 million umbrella. That gives you a total of $2 million of general liability coverage. If you have a $1 million general liability policy and a $4 million umbrella, that gives you a total of $5 million general liability coverage. So umbrellas are for increasing your general auto employer's liability. The umbrellas do not go over errors and omissions or cyber liability. We'll get into those next. Those are the most common extra coverages that I've seen that clients and brands are now requiring. Professional liability, errors and omissions, it's the same thing. You'll see it sometimes for professional / errors and omissions, it's the same thing. Basically, clients, brands want you to cover errors in work. Errors in work such as copyright and trademark infringement. So if your photographer, your director shoots something that they don't have the copyright or trademark rights to use, the owner of that copyright or trademark is going to go after not just the producer, but they're going to probably see it where it airs. So they're going to go after the client. They're going to be like, oh, that's a car commercial ad. I'm going to sue the car manufacturer. That is professional, aka errors and omissions liability. The other coverage that clients are now really cracking down on is cyber liability. The reason why they want cyber liability is because you have a lot of information and footage or photos or video for this client. If that gets leaked, if that gets sent to the wrong person, they want coverage for that. If you have proprietary information on something, if you have social security numbers of their employees or your employees, they want to know that, God forbid a data breach happens, you are covering that sort of liability, that's cyber liability.
We have a couple member polls around that. Let's go ahead and launch the first one, because both of these types of policies, I know I've been seeing them more frequently, but we just wanted to get kind of an understanding from our membership here. Have clients started to ask you to carry an E&O policy? Is that something that you've started to see the request for? Give the poll. I'm just curious, can you guys see the poll as it's going? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. Great. Let's go ahead and share the results. So that's interesting. Many of us have not seen the request for it. So with errors and omissions, let's say I have a prop stylist on a project that is providing props for the shoot, and it turns out that one of the props that gets used is the shape of it is trademarked or something like that. Is this an instance where errors and omissions would cover me?
So going back to that client contract doesn't say, whatever footage, photographs you provide me, you, the producer, you are entitled to review all the footage and everything. And once you deliver it to me, if something happens when I put this on social media or on a magazine or on TV, if someone comes after me for a copyright and trademark infringement claim, you are responsible. So the producer is responsible for all footage. Doesn't matter who brings what to set, is responsible for that footage at the end of the day and needs that errors and omissions coverage.
Would this be a type of coverage that you would recommend for someone who is a set designer or a prop stylist to carry?
So prop stylist, set designer, again, usually has a service agreement with the producer. And it usually says that they're not responsible for this type of thing, because at the end of the day, this producer is supposed to check the footage and go through and clear everything. So they typically don't carry this because they're not really responsible for it. The producer is responsible again for reviewing the photographs or the footage, clearing everything, and then delivering that to the client.
That's very interesting. Like having heart palpitations. Cybersecurity. We also had a poll around this because this does seem to be cropping up more and more on jobs during the pandemic as we're, JC, do you want to launch that poll? As we're all Zooming clients in from various locations. I know that I've personally seen this request, so I'm curious to see about everybody else. And Ross, you say that if someone comes in and like we're storing images in a Dropbox for a proprietary client and it gets hacked, is that again is something that cybersecurity would cover?
Yes. The main coverage the cyber liability covers are data breaches and ransomware. So data breach, someone steals information or gets leaked, or ransomware, they just steal your files and you don't have it backed up anywhere. It covers both. In addition to that, if like a data breach happens again and someone steals a bunch of social security numbers and driver's licenses, puts it on the dark web, you have to notify everyone that was information that was stolen. Costs a lot of money to notify all those people and provide credit monitoring and other type of cyber monitoring for those people. Cybersecurity pays for all of that.
Seems pretty important this day and age.
How much does something like that cost? I know it's just broad strokes.
So for a photographer, it can cost $1,000. For a producer, it costs maybe $2,000. If you're doing representation work and production, maybe $3,000 or $4,000 for a standard $1 million policy. It's the rates have gone up drastically in the past year because of all the claims that we've had. So I would recommend, if you don't have it, I'd probably buy it now before the premiums go up even more.
Isn't it, because I think when I got it, the client was requesting I get a specific amount of coverage.
Yes.
That drove the cost of my policy up, and that
yes.
That can end
so
up,
if you're working for Apple or Facebook, they're going to require $5 million of cyber liability. If you're working for a smaller company or brand, I've seen $1 million, $2 million limits. So it really depends on those requirements from that contract.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I think we're coming toward the end here, and of course we can do a part 2 if there's anything we didn't get to.
I have a question.
I love it.
If you have, like just an agency that represents a broad spectrum of talent. Photographers, set designers, fashion stylists, hair and makeup. What are the must-haves for insurance that you would recommend?
So if you're just doing that and you're not signing any contracts for
No,
with
I
clients,
need to do some production, you as well.
okay, if you're doing that, so workers' compensation, general liability, auto liability, I would probably have at least equipment coverage if you're ever in a crunch and you need to sign a rental house contract. If you're doing more than that, then probably a production package. Again, if you're in a crunch and and your third party producer doesn't have the correct coverage, or something happens where that coverage is not valid, I probably have that as well, along with errors and omissions and cyber. Those are the main ones.
Okay, thank you.
I hope you don't mind, Ross, but I'm going to put your email in the chat
Sure.
so that people can contact you after this webinar as well. Because I know I have a few little notes that I need to follow up with you for.
Anytime.
Is there anything else?
Any other questions?
Well, thank you again for having me. I appreciate it. Happy to do a part 2 if people are up for it.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Ross.
you.
This was beyond helpful.
Yeah.
And I'm sure as we think about it, more and more questions will come. And yeah, just really appreciate your time and expertise on the subject.
Well, again, thanks. It's been fun. Hopefully it wasn't too boring.
Not at all.
Not at all, Ross. Thank you.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
care.
Kelly. Thanks, Jen.
First.